How many of you are old enough to remember having a TV that had dials on it? Remember that? Some of you, okay? Like we called our kids the remote because you'd say to your kid, go change the channel. And they'd have to get up and go across the room to change the channel. You had two dials. One was the VHF had like 13 channels. And then one was UHF that had like 780 channels, all of which were blurry and fuzzy. So in my house, we didn't have any big antennas. We didn't have any fancy TVs. We had a pretty old TV set. And we were super conservative with what we were allowed and not allowed to watch. So really all we ever watched was Little House on the Prairie. And then maybe if we were feeling really spicy, we might watch The Waltons. Some of you guys don't know what either of those are. That's okay. They were wonderful TV shows from my past. You know, TV is different today, isn't it? You got all these channels. You've got cable and you've got satellite dishes. You've got Hulu and Amazon and Netflix and Apple and you name it, all these streaming services. But I don't know if this ever happens to you. Sometimes you'll sit down and you got all these choices and there is nothing to watch. And that we found that happening quite a bit. So we went ahead and splurged and got a subscription to BritBox. And I don't know if you know what that is. It's exactly what it sounds. It's British television, and it is awesome. I should get paid for this because I know all of you are going to run out and get BritBox now. So basically all Marianne and I watch anymore is sports and British crime shows. And we really like them. Maybe this speaks to how old we are. This is like kind of Matlock for the new generation. But we love our British crime shows. We just finished one called Shetland that happens in the Shetland Islands, north of Scotland. Before that, we did one called Hinterland, which is in Wales. One that we keep coming back to is called Death in Paradise. It actually happens in a fictional Caribbean island where there's a British detective who gets shipped there and he's got to solve crimes. And so since he's got that cross-cultural thing, all kinds of crazy hijinks ensue. And it just makes for great television. One of the things I've noticed in all of these crime shows, they basically run the same plot every single episode. Right? A crime happens, someone gets killed or something gets stolen, there's something bad happens, and then the detective does three things. First of all, they try to figure out what are all of the known facts. Like, what do we know about this? Secondly, they look for eyewitnesses. And then thirdly, they say, who are the suspects? So we're going to do this morning, we're going to play a little bit of whodunit this morning, and we're going to take that same track, that same approach, but we're going to begin in the book of 1 Corinthians. So if you have your Bible or you want to pull it up on your phone or your tablet, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is a letter that's written by the Apostle Paul. Sometimes we call him St. Paul, and he wrote it to his friends in the city of Corinth, hence the name Corinthians. This is the first of two letters, so it's 1 Corinthians, and he's near the end of the letter, and this is what Paul writes. 1 Corinthians 15:3 says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance," so this is really important, "what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures." So what Paul is doing here is he's fact-finding. Right? He's going to go over, okay, here's the known facts in this case. Fact number one, Jesus was alive. It sounds kind of silly, but that's the first thing. Jesus was alive. Now, here's the deal. This is not something you need a Bible to figure out. Right? Jesus is an actual historical character. There were lots of other ancient writers who wrote at a similar time as Paul, who wrote about the life and times of Jesus. And so we know that this is a well-attested to historical fact. Jesus was alive. Fact number two, Jesus died, right? That again, is a well-attested historical fact. In fact, you don't need a Bible to know that Jesus was a guy who was killed by the Romans. He was considered a revolutionary. He was killed by the Romans. He was hung on a cross. All of that is historical fact. Now, Paul adds a little bit here, right? He says that Jesus died, why? For our sins, not for being a revolutionary. And essentially, he's reminding us that the purpose of Jesus' death was to pay the debt that we have incurred with God, right? Whenever we do something wrong, whenever we violate God's commandments, we ruin his creation, so we are indebted to him. Jesus paid that indebtedness with his life. And then Paul says, according to the Scriptures, which essentially means this. All of this was predicted by the Old Testament. So prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, who wrote hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, they wrote about some of the things that Jesus would do and say. Even as far back as the book of Genesis, there are predictions and prophecies about the coming Messiah, and Jesus fulfilled all of those with his life and death. So fact number 1, Jesus was alive. Fact number 2, Jesus died. Fact number 3, he was buried. And then Paul gets to fact number 4, which is a little bit disputed. Because fact number 4 is that he was raised on the 3rd day. Now, what's not in dispute is that something happened on the 3rd day. Because on the 3rd day, Jesus' grave was empty. That's a historical fact. Jesus' grave was empty. Paul says the reason Jesus' grave was empty is because Jesus rose from the dead. Now, I know that seems a little bit outrageous, but let's follow Paul's line of thought here and see what he says next. He says, and that he appeared to Cephas. That's another name for Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. And then to the 12. So what Paul has done here is he's shifted away from the fact-finding now to let's talk about the eyewitnesses. Some of the eyewitnesses to this. And so he begins with Peter, that Peter claimed to have seen Jesus alive. And the 12 disciples, they claimed to have seen Jesus alive. Now here's the thing. When you make an outrageous claim, you've got to be able to back it up with evidence. Like if I came to you this morning and I said, hey, you're not going to believe what happened to me today. I went to McDonald's. I was on my way to church, went to McDonald's. I was going to get myself one of those sausage McMuffins. I love those things. I don't get an egg on them because eggs don't sit well on my stomach, but I get just the sausage and the cheese, and then you've got the muffin that makes it into a really delicious sandwich. It's probably greasier than anything I should be eating with cholesterol as high as mine is, but it's so awesome. So I went to McDonald's to get my sausage McMuffin sandwich and my coffee, and I was standing at the counter waiting for them to bring it out to me, and I turned around, and you are not going to believe who I saw. It was Queen Elizabeth. And you would say to me, David, you did not see Queen Elizabeth. And the reason is because all of us know that Queen Elizabeth died. I mean, we all watched her funeral on TV, right? The horses clip-clopping down the road with that big fancy feather thing and all those other British guys with their funny-looking hats because they got to make a big show about everything. So anyways, we saw the funeral. We know she's dead. You would say, you know, David, it's just not true. So, well, wait a minute. I've got more evidence. Because Steve was there too. And he saw her. So you ask him. And you might say, well, okay, yeah, fine. But Steve is your friend. So he's just going to back up what you say. That's not really great evidence. I say, okay, well, wait a minute. Dan was there too, and Dan's not my friend. Well, actually, that's not true. Dan is my friend. In fact, if you don't know Dan, Dan's about the best person in the whole world that I know. So I'm sorry I said that, Dan, but you sat in the wrong place. But I said Dan was there too, and he saw the Queen. All of us saw the Queen, and still you would say, David, look, I get that you say there was a couple of other people there, but this is not convincing to me at all, because I know that the Queen is dead. And then I said, well, wait. While I was there, and while I saw the Queen, there were 500 people in the drive-thru. Now, that's believable, right? Because it's McDonald's, not Chick-fil-A. And they don't move them through the drive-thru very fast. Well, I believe that there were 500 people in the drive-thru. I said, and they all saw the Queen, and they all gave me their names and numbers so you can contact them and ask them. And all of a sudden, you're interested. Well, I still don't believe it. It still seems a little bit outrageous to me. But if there's 500 eyewitnesses all willing to vouch for it, I at least want to hear what they have to say. That's what Paul is doing here. He says, look, Jesus rose. Peter saw him first. Then he appeared to the 12. Verse 6, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Now, this is critical what Paul is saying here. Paul is writing this letter probably somewhere between 50 and 54 AD. All right? Now, that's not me. I mean, it is me saying it, but that's not me saying it. This is, again, one of those just clearly accepted historical facts. In fact, you can look this up on Wikipedia. I know. Wikipedia is not like the source of all truth. You try to submit it in an academic paper, nobody's going to accept it. But neither is Wikipedia like a hotbed of Christian thought. So Wikipedia has no reason why they want to make Christianity look real. They have no reason to back up a crazy claim. And yet if you look this up in Wikipedia, just look at 1 Corinthians, and it will tell you that it was written by Paul between 50 and 54 AD, and most historians agree on this. And this matters Because Paul is writing this 20 years after the death of Jesus. And so just 20 years after the death of Jesus, he says there are 500 people, most of them are still alive, so go ahead and fact check me on this. He's leaving it out there for anybody to go and find out for themselves. Because he's saying 500 people in the same place at the same time saw the same thing. That is a little more convincing. And when you realize that Paul is putting it out there saying, you can check yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. Check with these 500 people. But he's not done yet with the eyewitnesses. He goes on and he says, then he appeared to James. Now this is great because James is Jesus' brother. All right? So James, the half-brother of Jesus, actually didn't believe that Jesus was God. If you read in the Gospels, James and some of his other siblings came to Jesus and said, Jesus, you need to come home now. You're kind of crazy. Jesus, you're running around the countryside telling people that you're God, and you're not God, so why don't you come home with us? We'll help you out, right? We'll get you some nice warm milk and some biscuits. We'll find you somebody that you can talk to. We'll get you right into heaven, and you can go back to being a carpenter like you're supposed to. But Jesus, why don't you come home with us right now? Because James and his brothers did not believe that Jesus was God. But something happened. Because after Jesus goes back to the Father, James becomes the leader of all of the Christians in Jerusalem. And early on, he's the leader of all of the Christians worldwide because at the end of his life, James believes that Jesus is God. Now, I want you to really chew on this, all right? If you have a brother, this makes sense to you because you know that your brother is not God. I have two brothers, and I can promise you, neither of them are God. And they would say the same about me because you know all of your brother's problems. James knew Jesus better than almost anybody else, and he didn't believe Jesus was God, and then he did believe Jesus was God. What changed his mind? What could possibly make you believe that your brother is God? And you're thinking, nothing. I would never believe that my brother was God. Well, what if your brother died and came back to life? Then I'd think about it, right? If you saw your brother die and you saw your brother get buried and then your brother showed up on your front door, you might say, all right, okay, that's different. That's unique. There's something about you. That's what happened to James. But Paul's still not done. He's got one more eyewitness. He says, last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. So you got to understand Paul's relationship to the rest of the Christians. They didn't get along real well. You see, Paul started out as being the persecutor of the church. When Jesus' movement first began to spread in Jerusalem and beyond, the religious leaders were trying to squash the movement because they hated Jesus. And Paul was actually their enforcer. He would go around city to city, village to village, town to town. He would find Christians, he would arrest them, drag them back to Jerusalem where they would be imprisoned, tortured, and killed. That's what he did. But something happened for him too that changed his mind about who Jesus was. You know what it was? He saw the risen Christ. Because when you see Jesus and you know that he actually died and now he's alive, that changes things. Paul is like the Meghan Markle of the early church. So like if I said to you, look, I saw the Queen at McDonald's, and 500 other people saw the Queen too, and check out Meghan Markle's Instagram because she's saying that she saw the Queen too. Now at this point, I got to pay attention because Meghan and the royal family, they don't get along real well. They don't have a lot in common. She's got no reason to, say good things about the Queen. They don't really like each other. And yet here is someone who is an enemy of the Queen saying the Queen is alive. Now all of a sudden I got to pay attention. That's what Paul is saying. I was an enemy of Jesus. I saw Jesus. I'm an eyewitness. Now, Paul understood that all of this might not convince everybody. And he understood that what he was claiming was actually pretty outrageous. In fact, he talks a little bit about that in verse 12. He says, now, if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? He's kind of creating a little math equation for us here. We say, look, if Jesus was raised from the dead, that means there's more to life. It means there's life after death, that we're created for something more. But then he flips the equation around and he says, but if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. So he just says, look, if it's impossible for someone to have life after death, then Jesus hasn't been raised. I get it. So if there's no resurrection, what that means is we live, we die, that's it, it's over, there's nothing beyond the grave. But if there's something beyond the grave, whatever you think that might be, ghosts, spirits, reincarnation, whatever. If there's something beyond the grave, then there's no reason to say that Jesus couldn't have risen again. He goes on in verse 19, he says, now look, if in Christ we have hope in this life only. So again, he's back to this idea that if there's no resurrection, there's no life after death. So if Jesus didn't rise again, then he's just a good guy who had good teachings. And if we've devoted our life to him, listen to what he says, then we are of all people most to be pitied. I mean, if you've devoted your life to worshiping and following and singing to some guy who died 2,000 years ago, that's kind of weird, right? You're to be pitied for that. That's not something to be excited about. The only reason we worship and follow Jesus and sing to Jesus now is because why? Because Jesus is alive, and that's what he says in verse 20. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So look, Jesus rose from the dead, and he's just the first. And everybody else who dies after him, who believes in him, who follows him, they rise again also. Jesus' resurrection just gets the whole movement started. So those of us who follow him, we don't fear death anymore because we know that death is just a stop between here and eternity. And we've got something so amazing to look forward to after the grave. Now, I know that many will hear this and say, okay, so there's a lot of eyewitnesses. Paul understands the implications of what he's saying. I get all of that. At the same time, David, it is an outrageous claim to say that someone died and came back to life. So maybe there are some alternative explanations, right? So historical fact, Jesus lived. Historical fact, Jesus died. Historical fact, Jesus was buried. Historical fact, the grave was empty 3 days later. So what is an alternative explanation for the empty grave? Well, there's only one. Somebody took the body, right? Jesus was either carried out or he walked out. It's one or the other. So let's take a couple of minutes and let's do this British detective style and figure out whether or not it's reasonable that someone could have stolen the body of Jesus. So when all my favorite British detectives go to solve a mystery, they always have this big board up, right? And on the board, they put up all the suspects, and then they draw lines, and they're always trying to figure out who did it. So we're going to do that this morning, all right? We're going to look at who are the potential suspects that may have taken the body of Jesus. All right, so first group of suspects is these guys right here. We're going to call them the disciples, right? So Peter, James, John, Thaddeus, all of them, they potentially stole the body, right? So that's our disciples. That's group number one. All right, group number two is we commonly call these guys the Pharisees, and that's correct, but there were more than just Pharisees involved, right? So there were Pharisees and there were also Sadducees. The Pharisees and the Sadducees together made up the ruling council in Jerusalem called the Sanhedrin. They're the ones who were responsible for taking Jesus to the Romans to be crucified. All right, so maybe for some reason, the Pharisees would have wanted to see Jesus' body stolen. So we don't know. Maybe they took him. Let's give this guy a goatee. I shouldn't have made him smile. That's not good. We're going to give him like hollow, vacant eyes and angry eyebrows because they're kind of the villains of the story. We don't really like them. So there you go. There's your Pharisees and Sadducees. That's the Sanhedrin, okay? Maybe they're the ones who took the body. Right? There's another group that's really important to this story, and we're going to call them the Romans. All right, now the Romans were led by Pontius Pilate. He's the one that signed the execution decree for Jesus, but it's also the Romans themselves that put Jesus to death on the cross. So he's going to frown. He's a bad guy. All right. So maybe it was the Romans that stole the body. There's one other group, and usually people don't talk about this other group of suspects, but I think if we're going to be intellectually honest, then we want to include them in the conversation. And this is just your everyday run-of-the-mill grave robber, okay? So maybe that's who took the body, it was just a grave robber. Now, as any good British detective would do, what we're going to do is we're going to look at these suspects and we're going to ask ourselves 3 questions. All right? We're going to ask ourselves, do any of these suspects have a motive to steal the body of Jesus, right? Do any of them have a reason why they would want to steal? I mean, that's kind of a weird thing to do, to go rob a grave, but do any of them have a reason why they would want to do it? Second question is, did any of them have an opportunity to steal the body? Let's see, how'd I do? You don't know how stressed I was about this word. 2 reasons. It's long, and I was afraid I'd go off the page. You know how you do that? You get to the end, you got to write really little letters. But I was also worried about spelling. I think I got it right. So did they have an opportunity to steal the body, right? Did they even have a chance to do it? And then the third question is, did they have means or ability? Were they even able to steal the body? So let's evaluate our suspects and say who had motive, who had opportunity, who had means. Let's start with these guys, all right? Let's start with the religious leaders. Did they have a reason to steal the body of Jesus? Well, they didn't like him, right? And, they were the ones who wanted him killed. They were out to stop his mission. So maybe they did. Now, understand, the reason the Pharisees and the Sadducees hated Jesus so much was because he turned the crowds against them. He revealed their hypocrisy. They were the ones who were in power in Jerusalem, and he threatened that power. And because he threatened that power, they wanted to shut him down. And because they couldn't silence him, they decided they had to kill him. So they conspired with the Romans to have Jesus killed. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to link these two together. All right, we're just going to link them together and say, all right, they're working together. They're co-conspirators. This over here is team anti-Jesus. And they killed him. So why would they have wanted his body? Well, if you think about it, they might have had more reason than anybody else to want the body of Jesus. 3 days after Jesus was killed, the grave was empty. And as soon as the grave was discovered to be empty, the disciples started running around Jerusalem saying, Jesus is alive. Go check out the grave. And I'm sure a lot of people did. Like, okay, we'll go check it out. It's empty, sure enough. Okay, Jesus is alive. And within a few weeks, 500 people are running around saying, we saw Jesus. He's alive. And within a few months, thousands of people in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas are saying, Jesus is alive. Now, the religious leaders and the Romans went to great lengths to stop the movement of Jesus. If they were willing to kill someone that they knew was innocent in order to shut it down, what would they do to stop the message of Jesus? I think they'd probably do just about anything, right? And they could have stopped the whole thing by just doing one thing. Just show me the body. Imagine if those early days, the disciples are running around Jerusalem. Jesus is alive. The grave is empty. Jesus is alive. And the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Romans simply said, wait, no. Jesus is not alive. Here's his body. If they had simply put Jesus' body on display in those first 2 weeks, there'd be no Christianity. We wouldn't be here. The movement would have been stopped dead in its tracks. Now understand, the Romans are the most powerful force in the world at that time. So they are also the most powerful force in Jerusalem. They have all the authority. They're not afraid to use it. They had on several occasions, you can read about it in the history books, slaughtered the people of Jerusalem because they didn't get what they wanted. So there was nothing that was going to stop them from getting the body of Jesus if they could. The Sanhedrin, they're the most powerful Jewish leaders in Jerusalem. They are the wealthiest of all of them. So there is nothing stopping them from getting the body of Jesus. They would do everything they could. And understand this. The reason they never put the body of Jesus on display is because they didn't have the body of Jesus. They didn't steal the body. They didn't steal the body. If they had, they would have shown the body because that's all they needed to do. What about this guy? What about the grave robber? Well, did he have any motive? Well, yes, every grave robber's motive is the same, right? To get rich. Now, if he had gone into Jesus' tomb, he wouldn't have found any valuables there because Jesus didn't have any. The only thing in Jesus' tomb was Jesus' body. So if he steals Jesus' body, his only question at this point is, how can I use this to make money? How can I get rich from Jesus' body? Well, he's got two options, right? He can either sell it to Team Anti-Jesus, or he can sell it to the disciples. Would the disciples pay for it? Well, maybe. We'll talk about their motive in a second. Would these guys have paid for it? Oh, yeah. Would they have paid a lot for it? Yeah, they would have. So what this means is simply this. Maybe a grave robber stole the body. Maybe they didn't. But whatever we decide about these three, that's where the grave robber goes, right? So the grave robber didn't just steal the body. They had to do something with the body. Either they gave it to the disciples or they gave it to the authorities, right? So let's talk about, well, they didn't give it to the authorities. You guys figured that out, right? You made that connection. Sometimes you're watching a detective show and you miss something. Don't miss that. They didn't sell it to them because they didn't have it. Okay, let's talk about the disciples. Did the disciples have motive to steal the body of Jesus? Yeah, they had more motive than anybody, right? Because if they can steal the body of Jesus, then now they can go out to everybody and say, Jesus is alive. Check out the grave. It's empty. People would go check out the grave. Oh, Jesus is alive. And they can spread this movement and say, look, hey, Jesus is alive. Now, in order to do this, they have to accomplish some stuff, right? First of all, they've all got to get on the same page with their story, right? Okay, so, what were we doing on Saturday? What were we doing on Sunday? What's our alibi? Let's get everything put together. Then, if they're going to get 500 people who are all in the same place at the same time to all agree that they saw the same thing, they've got to get all of those people on board with the plot, right? Then they got to go find James. Hey, James, we know you didn't believe that your brother was God, and we know that it kind of ended badly for your brother, and so you might not want to be on Team Jesus because right now Team Jesus is getting killed. But hey, would you like to join this plot with us? Would you like to join this conspiracy? We're all going to say that Jesus is alive. Now, we actually stole the body, James, but don't worry, we're going to say that Jesus is alive. And then they have to convince Paul. And then they have to keep it a secret. Now, here's the thing. You have in your family people who can't keep a secret, right? And you have in your friend group people who can't keep a secret. You know who they are. You're thinking about them right now. It's that person who, hey, we're going to have a surprise party. Don't tell this person, because if we tell this person, they'll blow the secret. Now, everybody's thinking about who that is in their family and their friend group. Now, some of you are like, I can't figure out who that is. That's because it's you. You're the one who can't keep a secret, all right? But we all know that person. Now, can you imagine that in a group of 12 or a group of 500, there's nobody in that group who can't keep the secret? Let me read you guys a quote, all right? This is from Chuck Colson. Some of you guys know who that is. Some of you don't. He was in the inner circle of Richard Nixon, American president back in the 70s. And he was one who actually served time for his work in the Watergate scandal. Now listen to what Charles Colson says. He found Jesus when he was in prison. He says this, I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. Politicians, right? You're telling me 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. And it's not just 12, it's 500, plus James, plus Paul. So they would have had to keep the secret, and then they would have had to stick to their story as they died. Because as Colson said, most of them were executed. As the Romans grew more and more hostile towards Christianity, many Christians were killed. So many of the 500, as well as 11 of the 12, were all killed for their belief in Jesus. And the only one who wasn't killed was tortured. So all of them were tortured, most of them were imprisoned, all but one were killed, and none of them at any point said, wait, I'm not telling the truth. So like if you came to me and said, David, do you really believe that you saw Queen Elizabeth? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, David, I'm going to kill you because I think you're lying. Okay, I'm lying. Don't kill me, right? So, you hear every so often about people who say, well, Tupac's alive or Biggie's alive. And some of you are like, who is Tupac and Biggie? Well, if you're my age, you know. You're like, I know who that is. All right, but, we do the same thing with Elvis and Diana and Michael Jackson. Every so often you hear about these people, I saw them, they're alive. But nobody's ever willing to die for that. Nobody's ever willing to say, well, yeah, no, I'm so confident in this that I will die for my belief that Tupac is still alive. These people all died because of their belief that Jesus was still alive. And what does that say to me? I think it's more than reasonable to say these guys didn't steal the body. There's no way they could put together a conspiracy that would keep a secret, that would stick to their story in the face of death for more than 40 years. So where does that leave us? There is not a reasonable suspect that stole the body of Jesus. I mean, there's a lot we didn't even talk about this morning. Like what it would take to beat the Roman soldiers who were guarding the tomb. And what it would mean for the Roman soldiers who were guarding the tomb that the tomb got robbed. It would have been death for all of them. It would have meant the destruction of Jerusalem if people had attacked and killed Roman soldiers at that time. It's just not reasonable. There's so much about this theory that's just simply not reasonable. And that only leaves us with one reasonable conclusion, doesn't it? The only reasonable conclusion to the empty grave is that Jesus walked out, that Jesus is alive. And understand this. That changes everything. The empty grave changes everything. Because no longer is death the end. In fact, what this means is there is something much greater waiting for us on the other side of death. Because the one person who experienced death and beat it has made a promise to us. See, get this. If Jesus really rose from the dead, and that's the most reasonable explanation for the empty grave. If Jesus actually rose from the dead, that means that he did what he said he was going to do. Because for years leading up to his death, he told his disciples, hey, listen, guys, they're going to kill me eventually, but don't worry, I'm going to rise again. And then he did it. And if Jesus did what he said, that means he is who he said he was. So when Jesus claimed to be God, he said things like, I and the Father are one. Before Moses was, I am. When Jesus claimed to be God, that means he's God. There's not a lot of other explanations for somebody who can come back from the dead. So if Jesus did what he said, and Jesus is who he said he was, what does that mean for us? It means we ought to pay attention to what he says to us. Jesus said that he came so that we could have life and have it more abundantly. Jesus said that he came so that he would be the way, the truth, and the life. No one could get to the Father except through us. John 3:16 says that Jesus came to die so that if we believe, we can go to heaven to be with him. What does Jesus say to us? He says simply this, put your life in my hands, and there is life for you beyond the grave. And it's even better than that, though, because if I put my life in his hands today, that means he has the abundant life for me now. You know, Holy Week was kind of a roller coaster. Starts with Palm Sunday, last Sunday. Jesus enters Jerusalem and everybody is excited to see him. The crowds come out, they're cheering, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're waving their palm branches there. So excited to see Jesus. At a super high point. Then a few days later, he's in the temple and he starts having opposition from the Sanhedrin, and they're starting to be out to get him. Thursday night comes and he hangs out with his disciples, his best friends, and it's kind of this bittersweet moment in the upper room where life is kind of good, but you know there's something dark on the horizon. And that night ends with Jesus being arrested and imprisoned and put on trial and falsely accused and tortured, and the next day he dies. And it's the darkest day in human history. And then Saturday happens. And Saturday is this day of waiting. It's a day of uncertainty. It's a day of anxiety. It's a day of fear because nobody knows what's next. My guess is that if I asked you today to put your life into Holy Week, you'd know exactly where to put it. Some of you say, you know what, I'm at Palm Sunday. Man, life is good. I'm on a high right now. Things are going well for me at work. Things are going well for me with my family. I'm making money. I'm comfortable. Things are really good. If that's where you are today, that's awesome. I'm really happy for you. But I want you to hear this. Resurrection means that this is not the end of the story. Don't get so comfortable with what this world has to offer you that you don't make eternal investments. Okay? Because resurrection means this is not the end. Now, maybe you're in a different place. Maybe you're kind of on Thursday night, right? Where life feels like it's okay, but there's kind of this impending sense of doom. There's something on the horizon, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just feel unsettled. For you, resurrection means the same thing. Resurrection means this is not the end. There might be something difficult coming, or it might not come. Whatever it is, the God who raised Jesus from the dead, he'll still be in control. And just like it says in Psalm 23, he will walk through that, whatever it may be, with you, and so you can step confidently into tomorrow knowing that God is with you. Maybe you're on Friday. Maybe you're in this place right now that feels like the darkest place you have ever been. Can I tell you that resurrection means the same thing for you? It means this is not the end. On the darkest day of human history, as Jesus hung on that cross, God did something beautiful in the dark. He redeemed our sins. He made it possible for us to be with him forever. He made it possible for him to adopt us as his daughters and his sons, because in the darkest of times, God does the most beautiful things. And in your life right now, if you're in the darkest of time, I want to remind you that God can do the most beautiful thing in your life too. Now, you've got to decide, in the darkness, am I going to let this make me bitter or better? Because if you choose bitterness, you'll miss out on the beauty that God has for you. But if you choose to let God work in the darkness, he can do something amazing in you and through you and for you. Maybe your life is on Saturday. You're just kind of waiting. You don't know what's next. There's this air of uncertainty. Sometimes it feels like anxiety or even fear. And you know what? For you, resurrection means the same thing. This is not the end. That God has something amazing for you on the other side. He doesn't reveal everything to us all at once. He simply wants us to take the next right step and the next right step and the next right step. And as we do that, it all unfolds out in front of you. You see, what resurrection means for every single one of us this morning is that this is not the end. The chapter that you're in right now, it's not the last chapter. It's not the final chapter. God still has amazing writing he wants to do in your life. And even once you get to the chapter of death, that's not the last chapter. There's more beyond the grave because Jesus is alive. I want you to hear this. Easter always comes. It always comes. And the reason is because resurrection is available for all of us if we'll receive it.